Hello. I had been debating about putting a bunch of dragons behind me for this video, considering that I am talking about, celestial dragons, world nobles, Tenryubitos, however you want to put it, heavenly dragon folk. I had been debating about putting a bunch of my different stuffed dragons behind me, but I'm like, no, that's an insult to the dragons because they're not these things. They're not these. They're not the celestial dragons. They are not the way these people work. Also, I have a new Nami shirt. Behold the glory of Nami. Also, I was like, well, I do have a dragon shirt that I could wear, but again, that would be an insult to the dragon. I can wear my new Nami shirt. She would be happy to rob the celestial dragons blind. We'll go with that. I have no doubt in my mind that if the Straw Hats ever made their way to Marie-Joie, one of Nami's intentions would be to find the treasure house, the treasure store, the treasure whatever, find that, and just try to get as much treasure as she could. A, because she's Nami, and it's treasure and gold and blah, 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 blah. B, Nami is probably well aware of the Celestial Dragon's heavenly tribute that is, given to them by the different countries. And she would probably be one of the people that would be for like getting it back to the countries that it has come from, with a little bit of finder's fee in her case, but not to the point of what the celestial dragons would request the payment be. So I can just see her doing that. I can also, and this is side note thing in regards to like the children of the celestial dragons, like the very, very young ones. I don't think Nami would want to necessarily hurt them. And I think there's a fair number of characters that would not necessarily want to hurt the celestial dragon's children. We saw the opposite of that when it came to Doflamingo and Rocinante, when it came to them during their flashback, and that they were hurt by the citizens of the island where they lived, which I'll get to much more when I get to I'm talking about Doflamingo when I get to the Dressrosa section of all of these videos, because that's more where he's associated with. But I don't think that all of those children, some of them, the older ones, would probably end up getting punished to a degree, but I don't think like the infants and the toddlers and the very young ones would end up getting nearly as severely treatment as the adults would when Dragon and the Revolutionaries happen to show up, which I will end up discussing probably near the end of this video. So, we of course all know that, I'm going through all the different rulers and leaders and talking about the world government setup right now, and of course kind of technically the bottom rung of that in regards to official power is the rulers and leaders that are the kings and queens and stuff like that of the different countries, particularly the 170 some that are part of the world government and the 50 that are the top ones. I talked about the Reverie last week and stuff. This week I'm going to talk about the celestial dragons overall, particularly the history of them that we are aware of, along with some additional new information down the line if we get information about Garing Figureland, or in regards to the Holy Knights or God's Knights, however you want to put them. They'll get additional videos down the line when we get to them, particularly when we get more information about some of the other family trees that are available. I may end up doing specific videos about them. Doflamingo will get talked about a whole bunch when I get to the Dressrosa section, so him and Rocinante and his parents will get discussed there. And then, of course, I am going to do a separate video, probably the week after this one goes up, where I talk about Don Quixote Milzigard, simply because he is kind of like the one good celestial dragon that we are aware of that has had that stayed a celestial dragon, not like Homing and his wife who gave up that title, but stayed a celestial dragon and tried to use their power for the benefit of for actually to benefit the other people from the lower realm. So we're of course aware that the celestial dragons are this aristocratic descendant of 19 of the first 20 families that established the world government. The one that is not a descendant, or the one that did not become a celestial dragon family, was the Nefeltari family. They of course return to Alabasta, where they continue to rule. The 20 families, we know several of their names already. We know, of course, Doflamingo, or Don Quixote being the main one that we are aware of, but also now we know about Jupiter, Warcury, Venus Juro, Mars, Saturn. I know I'm missing one. Figureland, now we know about that. Possibly the Nerona family in regards to Eam. And I'm probably missing another one of there. Plus, there's whoever, like, Roswald's family is descendant from, and Jalmac, and we got introduced to, like, Pluming several chapters ago. So there's other ones that we've been introduced to. We just don't know exactly where they fall within the family trees. This one is just going to be an overview of this. So, you know, we are, as an audience, we are not really introduced to the concept of the celestial dragons until we reach Sabaody, both in the manga and in the anime. And, you know, we're kind of introduced to them tentatively by Paguya, Papagu, not Paguya, Papagu, and excuse me, and Hachan telling the Straw Hats, so it's like, okay, if you see any of these people, do not interact with them, just keep your head down and that type of stuff. And, you know, several of the Straw Hats probably know who the Celestial Dragons are at this point in time. Like, Nami would probably know, Robin would probably know, Usopp might know, just because, like, they tend to be the ones that seem to read the paper. Sanji would most likely know about them. Zoro did not know what they were. Luffy didn't seem to know what they were. Brook may have, but I'm not sure. And then, like, Chopper didn't. And Frankie may have, again, but I'm not sure. We don't get, like, a head count of, like, which of the Straw Hats at the time are aware of who the Celestial Dragons are. Technically, Luffy should know who they are, just given his history because of Sabo and everything that happened with the Goa Kingdom, but that doesn't mean that Luffy was 100% aware if that was the reason why Sabo died as a child, because of Jalmac, but, or if he did, he didn't quite understand who these people were, but, or maybe that just adds to the reason why Luffy got so angry at, Charlos when he shot Hachan. Maybe Luffy's brain did make that connection. But they arrive at the Sabaody archipelago and they get explained of, like, okay, so just if you see these guys, don't go anywhere near them and just try not to make them angry. Of course, you know, we get introduced to them pretty quickly after that. When we see them roaming through the streets, we see Roswald and Charlia, whatever the daughter's name is, roaming through the streets, and they have, like, their slaves that they are riding on top of and have leashes and everything like that. And we're just, like, instantly, as an audience, there's just a whole of, like, we hate these people very quickly. And then we're introduced to Charlos, and, you know, with Charlos, it's, you know, he shoots a guy who's already hurt and is needing medical attention because he's in his way. He then tries to take the nurse who is trying to help said man, and then he shoots the nurse's fiance who is there trying to protect her, all because Charlos is like, oh, I want you as my new wife, number 27 or whatever it was. And then he just dismisses all of his other wives, or a bunch of his other wives, because he's bored with them. I highly doubt they have a Celestial Dragon prenuptial agreement. It's like, oh, you're no longer a wife. Okay, you're going to go be a slave now, which is probably just like what they were to begin with. Eustace Kid, for all of the interesting things that he has done in the series, which is not that many, beyond making a giant F-off railgun and shooting Big Mom with it, and attempting to fight Kaido twice. I don't know, he got some damage in on Kaido when they were on the roof. Mostly Big Mom, though. But he has a quote that I believe is, I think it happens during Sabaody when he says this quote. It's like, world nobles, slaves, human chops, against the purity of these upper classes, the villains of the world look positively humane in comparison. It's because the world's in the hands of scum like them that it's all screwed to hell. I mean, we're not the nicest guys, but at least we're honest about it. admittedly, this is coming from Eustace Kidd, so, you know. And I believe I went over this quote when I did my Kid in the Gang video that I did. I mean, Kidd has a point. The world is basically run by the world nobles. They are allowed to do whatever they want. They can come down from Marie Joie and they can buy people, sell people, shoot people, take people, do whatever they want. And because if someone tries to stand up against them, as what happens with Zoro and Luffy, a buster call is called, or an admiral is sent, depending on the severity of what happened. And we even saw the repercussions for another Celestial Dragon attacking a fellow Celestial Dragon, which I will go over later, in regards to when Melzigard attacked Charlos. Twice, or allowed it to happen to him a second time. So we see a lot of that, and we're just instantly, we do not like these people. We do not like these people at all. We know that it was approximately 800 years ago with the founding of the world government that 19 of the 20 families moved to Marie Joie. They gave up their statuses as the rulers of certain kingdoms, and they moved to Marie Joie, where they became where their descendants would eventually become the Celestial Dragons. And they have probably within that first 2 or 3 generations, because like the original founders probably would have still been alive, there may not have been as huge of a push to, you know, make themselves even better, but already you're setting yourself up on this place that you have dubbed the Holy Land of Marie Joie on top of the Red Line in the upper realm and the lower realm and everything like that. So you're already, you know, living way too high in your own horse there. And literally have your head in the clouds and a bubble. And, you know, over the course of the next 800 years is how their descendants just became worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I have a theory that there probably haven't been, that throughout the course of the time of the Celestial Dragons, there have probably been others who have left. Either they were kicked out for a crime that they committed against another Celestial Dragon, and that was their punishment, or they were they chose to leave, kind of the same way that Homing and his wife did, or some variation of that, where they, you know, go and move down to the lower realm, possibly being smarter about it than, you know, Homing and his wife were, but where they, where they became, you know, they had like an epiphany, and were like, hey, we're not even all that different from the other people, so why are we up here? And I have a whole theory about that, but you can't tell me that the only ones in the last like 40, 50 years that decided that, oh, we're going to be a Celestial Dragon with a conscience are very few sparse members of the Doflamingo, of the Don Quixote family. You cannot tell me that that is the case. So all the Celestial Dragons move up there. The only royal family that didn't out of the 20 was, of course, the Nefeltari family, which, of course, I've discussed before. Over that course of time, they developed and built up Marie Joie even more after they've taken it away from, the Lunarians and everything. Probably initially took over their castles and then built up their own and built up, Castle Pangea and everything, technically with, Eam as their full-on ruler, even though they don't know that, and whatever incarnation the Gorosei have at that point in time, whether it's always members of the same family that get picked for the Gorosei, or whether it's certain Celestial Dragons that already have an aptitude for certain things that get picked. We're not sure exactly the selection process for the Gorosei or for the Holy Knights. Charlos definitely didn't qualify for whatever it was. And their descendants, just build up more and more and, probably intermix and interbreed and everything like that. With all the different other families and everything, we're not sure exactly how that would have gone. We, of course, know that they have slaves. We, of course, know that over the time they end up demanding the heavenly tribute from other countries to join the world government and be members of the world government. They build up the Marines to be able to, fight against pirates or whatever form rebellions take up at that point in time. So we know that they build up that type of stuff and they build up that type of power. Plus, they build up a huge amount of fear among the civilians because, the civilians, they're afraid of pirates and everything like that. Pirates are a much more real threat than the Celestial Dragons, but given the fact that if you happen to encounter a celestial dragon, particularly if you live on like Sabaody and you happen to encounter celestial dragons, or you live on a kingdom where a celestial dragon happens to come and visit, like what happened in Goa, you are basically like, okay, I need to not piss this person off, and I don't want to draw attention to myself. And you pray that you are not someone that the celestial dragons find attractive enough to want to make you a wife or a husband. I'm sure that also is applicable there. If like Charla or whatever the heck the sister, Charlotte's sister's name was, I don't remember. She was annoying and she needs to be punched in the face as well. She got off easy during Sabaody. She just got knocked out by Rayleigh's Conquerors hockey. Admittedly, she did also point a gun at Kami, but she got off easy, in my opinion. Unlike her father and brother, who both got hurt, which they deserved. But if she'd been walking down the street and if she saw a man that she thought was handsome enough that she wanted to have as her husband number whatever 32, she probably could do that. Admittedly, we do not know the exact family structures within them. We also do not know like the hierarchy structures. Roswald is clearly the head of his family, but that might just be like him and his kids, because we don't know if he is like the highest ranked member of whatever family he is from. We do not know where Homing fell within the hierarchy of the Don Quixote clan either, or where Mezigard fell in the hierarchy of that. We do not even know the exact number of how many celestial dragons are still around at this point in time. Probably still a pretty good number, but, we don't know that exact number. We don't know if it's more male-dominated, female-dominated, depends on the family, depends on whoever the older one was. It's this whole question of like, okay, well, who's in charge now? If someone dies, and who's the head of certain families or certain branch families or things like that. So there's that. Eventually there is, of course, we get into the different cultural and higher classes versus lower classes. We have stuff where, of course, the celestial dragons probably very much value blood purity and stuff like that when it comes to their lines. They don't want the blood of wild creatures mixing with them, probably when it comes to any of the other races, long leg, long arm, snake neck, giants, fishmen, merfolk, three-eyed tribe, Kuja to a degree, since they do seem to be a little bit of a separate thing. A bunch of that stuff. We do not, we know the celestial dragons don't want to mix with that. They will keep them as slaves, but they don't necessarily, they'll keep them as slaves and probably do certain things that were referenced to have been done to the Boa sisters, to their other slaves. Stuff I can't really talk about in these videos, which is fair, but still sad. And, how that goes. And we don't know what happens with some of that stuff. But we know that they have this blood purity set up. We know that they do have like familiar ties probably to each other, because I doubt that they only intermarry within their own family, because, okay, you would think they would at least be smart enough not to do that. But they could intermarry with other celestial dragon families and just try to keep track of like who marries who. And okay, so you married into this family recently, so you should probably marry into this other family, and maybe this other family as opposed to this same one. Or depending on like where they are in regards to like, oh, you're like 16th cousins twice removed, it's fine. Or however that works. And so there's all of that. We know that there are disputes that happen among the celestial dragons, hence why the, God's Knights are a thing. We know that the celestial dragons have no regard for what justice actually is. It's like, justice is whatever the heck I say it is, which Sakazuki does not particularly seem to like that concept, because I highly doubt even he's okay. I highly doubt even Sakazuki is okay with, the celestial dragons having slaves, regardless of who said slave is, whether it's a pirate or something like that. I don't even think Sakazuki is okay with that. But he can't go against them, because we see him try to go up against the Gorosei, and that doesn't really do anything. Sengoku has probably tried to see what he could do with that type of stuff. who, Kong, who's the head of, the commander, the chief, whatever, of the world government, he's probably dealt with some of that stuff in the past before. Or they may know about, the sidewalks within Marie Joie that are pulled by the slaves and everything like that for the past and all of that. Just so disturbing. We know that they really have no connection to the common people. They just see them as horrible little vermin and playthings. This, of course, changes when it comes to Milzigard, where he actually ends up having the whole interaction with Otohime on Fishman Island and everything. We know that there have been certain people that have had an effect on the world government or on the Celestial Dragons. Roxy Zebek when he attacked God Valley, Fisher Tiger when he attacked Marie Joie and caused the Slave Rebellion, Luffy when he punched Charlos, and the Revolutionary Army very much recently in regards to what happens in general of the Revolutionary Army, but also with the fact that they literally just attacked Marie Joie and caused a lot of damage, and now they're causing a blockade to form where, supplies going to the Celestial Dragons coming from other countries can't get to the Celestial Dragons. And therefore, if they don't have bread, all they have is cake. Thank you, Oda. I love that joke. Marie Antoinette did not actually say that. It was just attributed to her later on to make her seem worse. Milzigard is the one that goes through the whole transformation of actually becoming a better person and actually realizing his own humanity and everything like that, which I'll go much more into detail when I get to him. We know that, Sabo has the horrible past with Gelmak, which would happen in Goa Kingdom. We know that there's, so many other variations that are examples of how things are done within the One Piece world with, like in Wano, for example, the way Orochi treated the civilians of Wano, his subjects, the way that he treated them was just horrible and everything, and very much similar to the way that a bunch of the slaves and stuff like that were treated by the Celestial Dragons and all of that, where he lived in opulence, and they just sit and suffer and go hungry or die because of the poison in the food or whatever. We know that Garp has specifically denied wanting to become a full-on admiral because it would put him directly under the thumb of the Celestial Dragons and the Gorosei, and he does not want that. He also refers to the Celestial Dragons as vermin at one point in time. I wonder if Garp ever met Milzigard. That would be an interesting meeting, and it would depend on when he met Milzigard and Milzigard's life. But there's all of that. We know that a good bunch of the Celestial Dragons are actually fairly ignorant of how the actual real world works, given the fact that, Homing was quite ignorant of how it worked when he and his, when he took his wife and sons down there. And that resulted in their death. Well, his death and his wife's death, and eventually Rochinate's death, and Doflamingo's descent into madness, and strings, and toys, and royalty, and then eventually just ending up in Impel Down. With all of that. To be discussed later. We see a lot of that. And the Goa Kingdom itself is also this representation of the haves and the have-nots and the very much have-nots when it comes to, Hightown and Edgetown and the Great Terminal and then the forest and then, Fuchsia Village way over here that's not even really associated with the kingdom to begin with. So there's all of that where they have all these different representations of things within the One Piece world that are very similar to the way that Marie Joie and the world as a whole is set up. That they are these little tiny, ecosystems that are these little mini ecosystems that show off the same setup. So there's that. They have the Heavenly Tribute, which is a huge amount of money that is sent from all the different world government affiliated nations that they send either in money or combinations of money and other resources and food and things like that that are then sent to Marigeois. We know that Charlos was willing very easily to pay 500 million berries to try to buy Camie at the auction house simply so he could have her piranhas eat her. And, you know, that's just he was only going to drop that much. They also buy devil fruits and then force their slaves to eat them. We saw this happen with the Boa sisters and probably other people throughout the course of time being slaves of the world government, or specifically of the celestial dragons. You know, we know that even Doflamingo was forced to comply with that, but he also, you know, kind of tricked them by taking the heavenly tribute hostage before it was able to get to Marigeois, which now the Revolutionary Army is kind of following that same concept where they are, taking, where they're doing a blockade to prevent supplies from getting to Marigeois to, starve out the celestial dragons to a degree, similar to what we're seeing on Egghead at the moment, but there is a barricade around Egghead. And we see all of that. We know that there are a whole bunch of nations that are rebelling at the moment that are members of the world government and are becoming possible former members of the world government at this point in time, and they are no longer going to send their heavenly tribute, so there's all of that. We also know that they are probably also being put down or attempted to be put down for the rebellions by the other Seraphim, S Gecko and S Croc and S Flamingo. Talk about Doflamingo a bunch. Yeah, there's that. We also know, of course, that the celestial dragons have, huge numbers of slaves that work for them that are ones that they bought from the auction houses, that are ones that are just brought there in general, or they probably just buy them as like a whole, oh, we have a discount on slaves, let's go buy some, or whatever. We saw that. We know that all of the slaves are marked with the hoof of the celestial dragon, or the hoof of the flying dragon, as it's also referred to as. And, we also know that they have this big giant golden version of it in the middle of their city, or they did. In the middle of Marigeois, they had it there in the celestial dragon city, and that got destroyed by Sabo, or Morley, or whoever destroyed it. Good on them. So there's that. We also know that, all the slaves, as I said, are marked with the hoof of the dragon. We know that the Sun Pirates, that Fisher Tiger specifically developed the Sun Mark to put over that. We know that the Celestial Dragons, when it comes to slaves, will take whatever they find interesting enough. We've seen them take children as slaves when it comes to Koala. We've seen them take, they wanted Camie, they had Fisher Tiger, they had the Boa sisters, they took the Boa sisters when they were children. We know that there's been tons of others. There were other ones that almost became Celestial Dragon slaves for the ones that were at the auction house and everything when the Straw Hats were at Sabaody, where they saved Camie along with the other slaves that were being auctioned off. We know that there's like a ton of other, hundreds, possibly thousands of slaves that are still at Marigeois, and hopefully they will end up getting freed at some point in time or be able to go out fighting against, the Celestial Dragons. We also know that they wear the explosive collars around their necks that prevent them from being able to run away, because if they get too far from certain areas, it will cause it to explode. And even if it doesn't kill them, they're now the stigma of being a runaway slave. And if you help the runaway slave, then you're most likely going to end up getting arrested or killed or turned into a slave yourself. And so there's all of that involved. We know that we've seen lots of different freed slaves, the Boa sisters, Koala, several other characters that we've seen, Fisher Tiger, other members that were part of the Sun Pirates at the same time, and things like that. And so we've seen a bunch of that. It also appears that at some point in his past, Bartholomew Kuma, the warlord of the sea, Kuma the Tyrant, that he appeared to possibly have been a slave of the Celestial Dragons when he was a child. That seems to be something that seems to be pretty apparent given those flashback memories that we thought we saw. We have not seen a mark on him that demonstrates this, but we also have not necessarily seen all of Kuma's body. And we've seen that the marks can be on their backs generally, but also probably on their foreheads or on their fronts or on their legs or arms or wherever the celestial dragon deems like, oh, I'm going to put it right here and do it that way. And so we see lots of that. We also see where they have different types of outfits. They'll put the girls in pretty dancer outfits and everything like that and try to keep them pretty, but they're also probably definitely exceedingly abused and everything like that. The male slaves are just kind of like, unless they're, something that the celestial dragons find, wanting to keep in good condition. They probably don't do too much of that. We know that they have this huge fear of the will of D. And that this has been passed down, that D's are the enemies of God. D's are like, the boogeyman version of what the celestial dragons are afraid of, or like the will of D clan with Roger and, Zebek and Garp and Luffy and Dragon and Law and Teach to a degree. Well, yeah, Teach. And, the Nefeltari family and, anybody else that has the will of D. Saul and such. And just people who carry the will of D, whether or not they actually physically have it as part of their name, that they are afraid of that. And that was one of the reasons why Roshinate wanted to keep Law alive, is because he had the will of D. And, it's, the D's are the natural enemy of God, is what they put it and everything. And then, of course, we have this national treasure within there. We do not know exactly what said national treasure is. A lot of people think it's the giant frozen straw hat in the basement of, Pangea Castle, which is quite possible, but we're not sure. We know that Doflamingo seems to know what this treasure is, and he also seems to think that it is enough for them to try to send someone to try to kill him, for the Gorosei or Eam to send someone to try to kill him. Whether or not Doflamingo knows that Eam exists is a little bit left up for debate. If he did, I wouldn't be surprised by that, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. So we'll have to find out about that later. Or if he goes, I suspected there was an evil ruler in shadow ruling the entire government at some point in time. I guess I was right. Maybe that'll be what happens. I don't know. We know that when it comes to internal conflicts, that they have the God's Knights that will show up and help deal with that. They dealt with the conflict between Charlos and Milzigard when everything happened there, when Milzigard had attacked Charlos twice and, the attempted murder. And we know that since then that the punishment ended up resulting in Milzigard being executed, unfortunately. We know that this was carried out by Garing Figurland, who is most likely Shanks's father, grandfather, uncle, whatever you want to go with. Definitely related to Shanks from everything we understand. But we don't know the exact setup of that. We do also know that, the God's Knights also seem to have quite a good number of fighters among them, and that I think some of them may have been sent to deal with some of the other uprisings. So we'll see what happens there. Most of the celestial dragons do not seem to have any form of enhanced physical ability. Milzigard had a giant mace or giant bat that he whacked Charlos with, but we do know that they have CP9 along with the Marines, specifically the Marine Admirals, at their disposal in order to send them out to deal with any problems that they might see and everything like that. CPI just are very specifically meant to be the bodyguards of the celestial dragons, and we see that when Lucci and Kaku and Stussy and other tall, vast person that I don't remember if we know his name yet, who is not at Wano and did not die. We don't know, they showed up and they protected Charlos, but they would not protect, Shirahoshi when Charlos was trying to turn her into a slave, and then that's when Milzigard stepped in. We see a bunch of that. I don't necessarily think Lucci enjoys serving the celestial dragons, but, we'll see what happens there. We see, a ton of those different types of interactions. And now I'm going to go through the history of the celestial dragons, or at the very least, the significant moments that we've seen throughout the story, overall. So we know that 900 years ago, there was the huge battle between the 20 royal families and the Great Kingdom, and that eventually that resulted in them defeating the Great Kingdom and them then taking over the world. That and forming the world government about 800 years ago because of the Void Century. The 20 royal families formed the world government. One of them, the Nefeltari family, returned to Alabasta. The other 19 then formed up and moved to Marie-Joie and took over the lands of probably the Lunarians at the time. Took over that and built up Marie-Joie into what it is today eventually. And eventually set up their kind of like just stranglehold on the world. Probably through forcing other countries to join them or other countries joining them willingly. We know that 700 years ago or so is when some celestial dragon ordered a bridge to be built between one island in the East Blue and another island. And that resulted in 700 years later, that island is still being built. That giant bridge is still being built. And that's Tequila Wolf. And that now has actually been stopped because, the revolutionaries showed up and, saved Robin and, saved all the people that were there and everything. About 41 years ago or so in the story, there's like a whole jump in there. Like, we're not sure exactly what was going on, but celestial dragons did other horrible things. Insert that. About 41 years ago is when Don Quixote Doflamingo, along with his wife and his two children, Doflamingo and Rocinante, left Marie-Joie and gave up their status. We know eventually Homing's wife died of sickness, and that Doflamingo eventually killed his own father. Rocinante became orphaned and ended up being raised by Sengoku, and Doflamingo got taken in by Treble, Diamante, Pika, and Virgo, and eventually all of that stuff happened. But even when Homing tried to beg them to at least take back his wife and children, the other celestial dragons wanted nothing to do with them and just let them stay and rot. It's like, you gave up your position. It doesn't matter what you want anymore. They didn't even care at that point in time. And all of that. And then we know that 38 years ago is when the God Valley incident occurred. We know that this involved an island that was probably considered very important to the celestial dragons because they were there with their slaves. And for reasons, the Rocks pirates, led by Roxy Zebek, showed up and they started attacking. This, of course, resulted in, at the time, Garp and Goldie Roger had to work together to then defeat Zebek, and that resulted in somehow God Valley just being wiped off the map. Bye-bye Giant Island. Probably was not sky lasered out of existence like what happened with Lelucia, but it at least, I don't know. We'll find out what happened to the island at some point, I'm sure, but we know that that was an important place for the celestial dragons. We know that then much later on, Vegapunk ended up working, joining force or becoming employed by the celestial dragons and the world government after he had disbanded Mads and everything like that. We kind of think this was about 25, possibly 30 years ago at the latest, probably closer to like 24 years ago or something, given other things that we've heard about, with what happened with Ohara and everything like that. There is also the Ohara incident that occurred where, Ohara got buster called by the Gorosei, but the Gorosei I'm going to a much more in-depth thing on when I get to that. That'll be in probably after I do the Milzigard video. Then, of course, 15 years ago, there was what happened with Fisher Tiger, where he had his rebellion, where he scaled the Red Line and resulted in, attacking Marie-Joie and causing huge numbers of slaves, including the Boa sisters and other future members of the pirate of the Sun Pirates, along with other members, other slaves, Koala included in there, and others, managed to escape during his rampage, which probably caused a lot of trauma for the celestial dragons, and all of that. We know that 12 years prior to the storyline is when Saint Jalmac visited the Goa Kingdom, and when he shot Sabo's boat, and he supposedly killed Sabo at that point in time. 10 years ago is when Milzigard ended up going down to Fishman Island in order to try to get back his prized Fishman slave collection. This, of course, resulted in him interacting with Otohime and eventually becoming, going through this, internal transformation of his soul, and morals and everything, and becoming a good person. Then there's, of course, everything that happened on Sabaody 2 years ago in the current storyline, where, Luffy and the Straw Hats ended up interacting with the celestial dragons that were there, Charlos, Roswald, and Shalria, whatever you want to call her, where it resulted in Charlos getting punched in the face. Insert reason in the video for me to use that image again, if I haven't used it before already in the video. In all of that, by Luffy. And then, of course, that resulted in, of course, Luffy's bounty skyrocketing and everything. And, of course, Sabaody being attacked by Kizaru and the pacifistas and everything. Eventually, there's, there's the War of Marineford that happened. The Celestial Dragons really aren't all that involved in that. But, not really too much happens there in regards to them. And then, of course, there's 2 years later. We know that, this is where we learn everything about what happened in Dressrosa and all of those arcs and everything there. And, of course, where we have the Reverie arc, where, Charlo shows up, tries to, enslave Shirahoshi, and where, because Neptune tries to fight back, but he's like, if he does attack, he will then, just cause more problems. And this, of course, is when Milzigard shows up and whacks Charlos across the face with his giant bat, mallet, whatever you want to call it, I don't know, but like whacks Charlos away with that. And causes significant damage. Good on you. And then, starts, where Milzigard starts setting up a better relationship with, the Neptune family at that point in time, and being like, I will protect Shirahoshi during the rest of these meetings and everything. So that way nothing like this happens again, which he stands by that. We know that, lots of stuff. We know that by the, we learn later on that by the end of the Wano arc, when we get the catch-up of everything, we know that Sabo and the rest of the Revolutionary Army, or several of the Revolutionary Army commanders, in regards to Morley, Karasu, and Lindbergh, they attacked Marijois. Karasu and Morley got into fights with Fujitora and Green Bull, and they also were there to save Kuma and everything. But we know that they also probably helped with saving a bunch of different slaves and everything like that were there, and helped get them out of there, because Sabo stole those keys so they could free a bunch of the slaves. And now, as I stated, they have set up a giant blockade that is preventing a good amount, if not all, of the supplies from reaching Marijois by attacking or detaining the different vessels that hold them, or sending them back to the countries if the countries are in rebellion and such. We also know that because of Milzigard's, because Milzigard technically helped in regards to protecting Sai and Leo when they attacked Charlos again, when Charlos showed up again to try to, get Shirahoshi. Milzigard was then tried and has been since executed by St. Figurland Garing, along with the God's Knights, and that they are this very other high-ranking set of world nobles within the world nobles themselves. And that Garing has a connection, one would say, to God Valley, but we don't know exactly what that is. In regards to a little bit more, and we're almost finished, the Celestial Dragons are obviously this setup of the way that old money works in the world. If you have enough old money, regardless of what family you are from, if you have enough old money, you have connections in lots of different places, and you can use those to your own advantage. Blue-blooded aristocrats would do this. People who, people who nowadays would just have like this huge amount of money because, like, oh, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was, this thing, and now we still have all of this money and everything. That has happened. There's lots of different families that are built up that way. And, you know, there's lots of different variations of this all over the world, with ones who are, you know, above other people because of, you know, oh, what family they're from or whatever else you've seen, where they don't get punished for their own crimes, or they're able to, you know, bail their way out of jail, as opposed to, you know, normal people who, if charged with the same thing, would not be given that opportunity, or they would not have the money to be able to do so. So there's a lot of that stuff. You know, just the celestial dragons are this representation of, like, this is what happens when people just abuse their power in regards to the money that they owe and their status in the world, and they do not fear being punished for the decisions that they have made. Because why would they fear it? They're the ones that are in control of everything. So they have the military and the Marines and their own, you know, specific weapons and everything like that at their beck and call. So why would they care? Why would they worry about having to atone for any sins that they've done? And that is kind of what the celestial dragons are very much this representation of. So that's what we have. I was on a soapbox there for a little bit at the end. Sorry. But that's what we have there for the celestial dragons overall. As I said, I will be doing a separate video about Milzigard. And then when I do get to Dressrosa down the line, I will have a separate video where I talk about Doflamingo, and probably a separate video where I talk about Rocinante. Just because I like Rocinante so much, and he's awesome, and Law is kind of keeping his memory alive, particularly with his R room. So that's what we have. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Also, I very much hope that if ever Nami ends up in Marijois, she finds a way to rob them blind. Bye!